Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Last Normal Morning. Carl Wolf believed in patterns. 10 years as a military investigator had taught him that chaos always had an underlying structure. You just needed to find it. That Saturday morning in suburban Denver, he followed his weekend routine with the precision of a man who understood the comfort of predictability. He'd kissed Crystal goodbye, 7:15 a.m., same as always. She'd told him she was covering a weekend shift at the hospital. She was a surgical nurse at Denver General. Their daughter, Sophie, was still in her pajamas, watching cartoons with her cereal bowl balanced on her knees. "Be good for Daddy," Crystal had said, ruffling Sophie's blonde curls. Something had flickered in her eyes when she looked at Carl, but it was gone before he could identify it. She grabbed her purse and left through the garage door. Carl had noticed the subtle changes over the past 6 months, but he'd attributed them to stress. Crystal had been distant, taking more shifts, spending time on her phone. Classic signs his investigator brain had whispered, but Carl had pushed those thoughts away. They'd been married for 8 years. They'd built a life together in this 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. They had Sophie. He'd been a fool. At 7:47 a.m., Sophie wandered into the kitchen where Carl was reading the newspaper over coffee. She'd been unusually quiet all morning, her small face pinched with something that looked like anxiety. "Daddy." Her voice was small. "What's up, sweetheart?" She fidgeted with the hem of her Princess Elsa nightgown. "Can we go to the park? After I finish my coffee, sure." "No, can we go now?" Carl looked up from his newspaper. Sophie was twisting her hands together, tears building in her eyes. "Sophie, what's wrong?" That's when she'd grabbed his phone from the counter with surprising urgency. "Daddy, call 911. Right now." Carl had laughed, not unkindly, but with the gentle amusement of a parent who'd heard his daughter declare countless emergencies over lost toys and scraped knees. "Sweetie, everything's fine." Sophie's face crumpled, and she started crying in earnest. "No, Mommy put something in the garage." She hiccuped, struggling with the words. "He said not to tell you. It's ticking." The world stopped. Carl's military training kicked in before his conscious mind could process the horror. He was out of his chair, scooping Sophie into his arms. "What did you say?" "I heard Mommy talking to a man last night. He gave her a box. She put it in the garage. I heard ticking this morning when I got my bike helmet, and Mommy said." Sophie sobbed against his shoulder. "She said not to tell you or the man would hurt me." Carl was already moving. He carried Sophie to the front door, grabbed his car keys from a hook, and ran. His mind categorized the information with clinical efficiency, even as terror flooded his veins. Explosive device. Garage. Time delayed detonation. His truck was parked in the driveway, which meant whatever was in the garage had been placed to maximize structural damage to the house. He strapped Sophie into her car seat with shaking hands. "Good girl, Sophie. You did the right thing. You're so brave." He peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. In his rearview mirror, he saw neighbors on their lawns, Mrs. Rodriguez walking her dog, the Morrison kids playing basketball. Normal. Everything looked so goddamn normal. He made it 2 blocks when the shockwave hit. The explosion was a physical force that rocked his truck. Carl slammed on the brakes and looked back. A fireball rose into the morning sky where his house had been. No, where his house still stood, but engulfed in flames. The garage had been completely obliterated. Fire spread to the main structure with terrifying speed. Sophie screamed. Carl's ears rang. He pulled over, hands frozen on the steering wheel, watching 8 years of his life burn. Seconds later, his training reasserted itself. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his voice steady despite the adrenaline dump. "This is Carl Wolf. There's been an explosion at 2847 Maple Street. I need fire and police. My wife may have been inside, but Crystal wasn't inside. She'd left 20 minutes ago, and if she'd planted the bomb, she knew exactly when it would detonate. His wife had just tried to murder him and their daughter." The operator was asking questions, but Carl's mind was 3 steps ahead. He looked at Sophie in the back seat, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the orange glow of their burning house. He'd been a military investigator for a decade before retiring 3 years ago to spend more time with his family. He'd tracked insurgents through mountains, pieced together evidence from bombed-out buildings, and broken conspiracies that went all the way up the chain of command. He'd been trained to survive in hostile territory, and his wife had just turned his life into a war zone. Chapter 2. The story begins. The next 3 hours were a blur of emergency responders, questions, and concerned neighbors. Carl played the role of the shocked husband perfectly, which wasn't difficult, because part of him genuinely was in shock. The other part, the investigator, was coldly cataloging every detail. Fire Chief Spencer Donnelly surveyed the ruins with grim efficiency. "Mr. Wolf, you're incredibly lucky. If you'd been in that garage when it went off." He shook his head. "Can you think of any reason your house would explode? Gas leak, maybe?" "I have no idea." Carl kept his voice appropriately shaken. "I'm just grateful we got out." Detective Randall Daniel arrived 30 minutes later, a stocky man in his 50s with sharp eyes that reminded Carl of his old commanding officer. "Mr. Wolf, I'm going to need to ask you some questions. Where's your wife?" "She left for work around 7:15. Denver General. She's a surgical nurse." Carl pulled out his phone. "I've been trying to call her, but it goes straight to voicemail." That was a lie. He hadn't tried calling Crystal at all, because the moment Sophie had said, "Mommy put something in the garage," Carl had understood that this wasn't a mistake or an accident. This was intentional. And if he called Crystal now, she'd either continue the charade or she'd realize that he and Sophie had survived. He needed time to think. "We'll contact the hospital," Daniel said, making a note. "Your daughter, Sophie, right? Can you tell me what she told you about the ticking?" Carl's jaw tightened. "She said she heard something ticking in the garage this morning. Kids have wild imaginations, but thank God I listened to her." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "So she didn't mention anything about anyone placing anything there?" This was the moment. Carl could tell the truth, that Crystal had planted a bomb with help from an unknown man. But if he did that, he'd lose the element of surprise. Crystal would know he knew. She'd lawyer up, claim she was coerced, play the victim. And whoever was helping her would disappear into the shadows. Carl thought of Sophie's terrified face. "The man would hurt me." "No," Carl said quietly. "She just heard ticking. Probably pipes or something mundane that saved our lives." He saw Daniel's skepticism, but also his sympathy. A man who'd just lost his home, nearly lost his child, waiting for news about his wife. Who could be too hard on him? What Daniel didn't know was that Carl Wolf had spent 10 years learning how to lie to people who were trained to detect lies. You couldn't break a skilled interrogator with torture. You broke them by making them want to believe you. His phone rang. "Hospital number." Carl answered, putting on a show. "Hello. Yes, this is Carl Wolf." "What?" "Well, thank God. Is she okay?" "I'll be right there." He looked at Daniel with convincing relief. "That was Denver General. Crystal just heard about the explosion. She's leaving work now to meet us." "Good," Daniel said. "We'll want to interview her too." "Mr. Wolf, I have to ask, is your marriage okay? Any financial troubles? Disputes?" Carl met his eyes steadily. "We're happy, Detective. 8 years, no major problems. I have no idea why this happened." Another lie, but necessary, because Carl was starting to piece together the pattern, and what he saw terrified him more than the explosion. Crystal hadn't just tried to kill him. She tried to kill him and Sophie. Their daughter was collateral damage in whatever plan she concocted. That meant Crystal wasn't being coerced. She was a willing participant, and Carl needed to find out why before he could figure out how to make her pay. Chapter 3. The Reunion. Crystal arrived at the disaster site with perfect timing, late enough to seem like she'd rushed from work, early enough to seem concerned. She parked her silver Honda and ran toward Carl with convincing horror etched on her features. "Oh my God, Carl!" "Sophie." She reached for their daughter, but Sophie flinched away, burying her face in Carl's shoulder. Crystal's mask slipped for just a second. Surprise and something darker flickered across her face. "Baby, it's Mommy. It's okay now." "She's scared," Carl said evenly, holding his daughter tight. "We all are." Crystal's green eyes met his, searching. Carl saw the question there. Why are you alive? He saw it because he'd been watching for it. The paramedics checked her out, Carl continued. She's fine. We're both fine. We got out just in time. He paused. Sophie said she heard something ticking in the garage. Probably just the water heater acting up, but it made her nervous enough that we left. Luckiest instinct ever. He watched Crystal process this. She was trying to figure out if Sophie had told him anything else. Carl kept his expression neutral, shell-shocked husband, not suspicious investigator. I can't believe this happened, Crystal breathed. She reached for Carl's hand, and he let her take it, even though his skin crawled at her touch. Our home. We can rebuild, Carl said. That's what insurance is for. There, another flicker in her eyes. Insurance. Detective Daniel approached. Mrs. Wolfe? I'm Detective Daniel. I need to ask you some questions about your movements this morning. Crystal went through her story smoothly. She'd left at 7:15 for her shift at Denver General. She'd been in surgery prep when someone from administration found her and told her about the explosion. She'd left immediately. Yes, their marriage was fine. No, she had no idea what could have caused this. No, she hadn't noticed anything strange about the house recently. It was a good performance. If Carl hadn't known better, he would have believed every word. Where's your car? Daniel asked suddenly. Crystal blinked. What? Your car. You said you went to work. Where did you park at the hospital? The staff lot on the west side. Why? We'll need to verify your timeline, Daniel said. Standard procedure in cases like this. Carl saw panic flash across Crystal's face, quickly suppressed. Of course. Whatever helps. After Daniel moved away to coordinate with the fire marshal, Crystal leaned close to Carl. Did Sophie say anything else? About what she heard, Carl looked down at his wife. This woman he'd married, who he'd loved, who'd given him a daughter. Just that she heard ticking. What? No reason. I'm just trying to understand what happened. Crystal's smile didn't reach her eyes. We should get Sophie somewhere safe. Maybe my sister's place. Actually, I already called Sergeant Eddie Mullen, my old Army buddy. He's got that big house in Boulder. He said we could stay there as long as we need. Carl saw Crystal's jaw tighten. Eddie Mullen had served with Carl in intelligence. He was, in every sense that mattered, Carl's brother. Eddie was also the last person Crystal would want them staying with. Too protective, too observant, too likely to see through whatever game she was playing. That's generous, Crystal said carefully. But wouldn't we be more comfortable with family? Eddie is family. Carl's tone left no room for argument. He's already on his way to pick us up. The police said we can't go back to the house anyway. It's a crime scene until they finish their investigation. Crime scene. He watched those words land. Crystal was trapped. If she pushed back too hard against staying with Eddie, it would look suspicious. But if she agreed, she'd be under observation by someone who wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in anyone who threatened Carl or Sophie. Okay, Crystal said finally. Whatever you think is best. Carl pulled Sophie closer. His daughter hadn't said a word since Crystal arrived. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't fully understand what. 5 years old, and she'd already saved their lives once today by being brave enough to speak up. He wouldn't let his wife get another chance to hurt her. As Eddie's black pickup truck pulled up to the curb, Carl made a decision. He wouldn't go to the police yet. He wouldn't confront Crystal. He would do what he did best, investigate. Find out who she was working with, why she wanted him dead, and what the endgame was. Then he would dismantle her life piece by piece, the same way she tried to demolish his. Crystal thought she'd married a family man who'd gone soft in retirement. She'd forgotten that before he was Sophie's father, before he was her husband, Carl Wolfe had been a hunter of men. He'd tracked terrorists through war zones and brought down criminal networks that thought they were untouchable. His wife had just made the worst mistake of her life. She'd left him alive. Chapter 4. Surveillance. Eddie Mullen's house in Boulder was a fortress disguised as a suburban home. Security cameras covered every angle, reinforced doors, safe room in the basement. Eddie had left the Army the same time as Carl, but his paranoia had remained at military levels. Tell me everything, Eddie said the moment Crystal went upstairs to rest after their arrival. He was a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and the kind of alert posture that never fully relaxed. Carl laid it out in detail. Sophie's warning, the explosion, Crystal's reaction. Eddie listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. "She tried to kill your kid," Eddie said flatly when Carl finished. "I know. What's your move?" Carl looked toward the stairs. "I need information before I act. She's working with someone. Sophie heard her talking to a man. I need to know who and why." Eddie nodded slowly. "You want me to tail her? Can you set up surveillance on her phone? Track her movements?" "Illegal as hell, but yeah." Eddie grinned without humor. "Good thing we both signed a lot of NDAs that taught U.S. skills we're not supposed to have." Over the next 3 days, they built a case. Eddie installed spyware on Crystal's phone using a technique they'd learned for tracking enemy combatants. The app was invisible, undetectable, and gave them access to everything: calls, texts, location data. What they found was damning. Crystal had been having an affair for 8 months with a man named Loren Reed. He was a financial advisor at Crystal's bank, good-looking, smooth-talking, and according to Eddie's deep dive into his background, heavily in debt from gambling. The affair itself wasn't surprising. What chilled Carl's blood was the insurance policy he discovered while searching through Crystal's belongings. She'd taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Carl 6 months ago. He'd signed the papers without thinking much about it. Crystal had presented it as being responsible parents, making sure Sophie would be taken care of if anything happened to him. The premiums were paid from their joint account. He'd never questioned it. But now, cross-referenced with the timeline of her affair, the pattern became clear. Crystal and Loren had planned this. Kill Carl, collect the insurance money, run off together. Except they'd failed, which meant they'd try again. "We should go to the police," Eddie argued on the 4th day. They were in his basement office, surrounded by monitors showing Crystal's location at the hospital, actually at Loren Reed's apartment, and her recent text messages. Carl shook his head. "Not enough evidence. Right now we have an affair and a suspicious insurance policy. Without proof they planted the bomb. Any decent lawyer tears this apart." Crystal claims Loren pressured her. She was afraid. She didn't know what he was planning. She might even get away with attempted murder. "So what's the play?" Carl stared at the monitor, showing Crystal entering Loren Reed's building. "We make them think their plan worked." Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Crystal tried to kill me and Sophie. She failed, but she doesn't know how much we know. Right now, she's probably panicking, trying to figure out her next move with Loren." Carl pulled up the financial records Eddie had compiled on Loren Reed. "But look at this. Loren owes serious money to some dangerous people. Gambling debts to Fernando Brooks's organization." Eddie whistled. Fernando Brooks ran the most prominent loan sharking operation in Denver. He didn't break kneecaps himself anymore. He'd moved up in the world, but his enforcers were legendary. "Loren's desperate," Carl continued. "That's why he latched on to Crystal in this insurance scheme. He needs that money and fast. How does that help us?" Carl's smile was cold. "Because desperate people make mistakes, and I'm going to give them the opportunity to make a fatal one." Chapter 5. The Trap. Carl's plan required precision and patience, 2 things he'd cultivated during his military career. The first step was information warfare. He began making calls, casually mentioning to old friends and neighbors that he was working with a lawyer to update his will after the gas explosion. He made sure to mention the insurance policy, expressing relief that at least Crystal and Sophie would be taken care of if something had happened to him. He knew gossip would travel. In their social circle, news spread fast. Meanwhile, Eddie tapped into Loren Reed's phone as well. The conversations they intercepted were increasingly frantic. "Loren, we need to finish this. They're investigating the explosion. What if they find something?" "Crystal, they won't. There's no evidence. The device was completely destroyed." "Loren, Fernando's guys came by again. I need that money now." "Crystal, we can't try again so soon. It'll look suspicious." "Loren, then what the hell do we do? I'm dead if I don't pay them back." Carl listened to these exchanges with clinical detachment. Crystal's voice, the same voice that had whispered, "I love you" in the dark, that had sung lullabies to Sophie, now casually discussing his murder like a logistical problem. The hurt would come later. Right now, he needed to focus. "They're falling apart," Eddie observed. "Reed's a weak link." Carl nodded. "Which is exactly what we're going to exploit." Phase 2 of his plan involved a friend from his army days, Melvin Richard, who now worked as a private investigator. Melvin had a particular talent for creating paper trails and staging scenarios that looked entirely legitimate. "I need you to approach Loren Reed," Carl told him over coffee at a diner far from Boulder. "You're going to offer him a way out." Melvin, a wiry man with sharp features and a deceptively casual manner, leaned back. "What's the play?" "You're a representative for Fernando Brooks. You know about his debt. You're there to offer him a deal. Fernando has learned about the insurance scheme. He wants in. If Loren gives him 40% of the insurance payout when it comes through, Fernando will forgive his debt and provide an alibi for the night of my accident. And if Reed's smart, he'll realize this gives him an out," Melvin said thoughtfully. "Fernando's backing means protection. It also means Reed doesn't have to do the killing himself. Fernando's people will." "Exactly. And Crystal won't like it. She'll want to keep all the money. That friction will make them sloppy." Melvin grinned. "You're a devious bastard, Carl. I learned from the best." Carl's expression hardened. "I want them recorded. Every conversation, every plan. Enough evidence that no lawyer in the world can spin their way out of it. Consider it done." The trap was set 2 days later. Melvin, playing the role of a Brooks enforcer named Victor, approached Loren Reed outside his office building. Carl and Eddie watched from a van half a block away, monitoring the wire Melvin wore. "Loren Reed." Melvin's voice came through crystal clear. "Mr. Brooks would like a word." On their screen, they saw Lauren's face go pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Get in the car, or we have this conversation right here in front of your co-workers." Loren got in the car. Melvin drove him to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, one Eddie had rented specifically for this purpose. Inside, it looked appropriately intimidating. Industrial lighting, concrete floors, the kind of place where bodies could theoretically disappear. "Mr. Brooks knows about your little insurance scheme," Melvin said, pacing around Loren like a predator. "Killing Carl Wolf for his life insurance policy. Bold move." I didn't." "Shut up." Melvin's voice cracked like a whip. "We know everything. The bomb in the garage. Your girlfriend, Crystal. The $2 million you're supposed to collect. Mr. Brooks is very interested in this plan." Loren was sweating now. "What does he want?" "He wants in 40% of the payout. In exchange, he forgives your debt and provides you with an ironclad alibi. His people will handle the actual job. All you have to do is make sure it looks like an accident and that the insurance pays out." Carl watched Lauren's face cycle through emotions. Fear, calculation, hope. The man was weighing his options, and Carl could practically see the thoughts. Fernando Brooks's protection. Professional killers. No more debt. I don't have to get my hands dirty again. "How do I know this isn't a setup?" Loren asked. Melvin pulled out a folder and tossed it on the table. "Because Mr. Brooks already has people watching you and Crystal. These are photos from the last week. If he wanted to turn you into the police, he already would have. He wants his money, not justice." Loren opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were genuine surveillance photos Eddie had taken, Loren and Crystal meeting at various locations, always careful, always looking over their shoulders. "Okay," Loren said finally. "Okay, what do I need to do?" "You need to convince your girlfriend that this is the best play. Tell her Fernando's onto you anyway, so you might as well take his deal. He wants Carl Wolf dead within 2 weeks." In the van, Carl watched Loren Reed agree to hire someone to murder him. The man's voice was steady, businesslike, not a hint of remorse or humanity. Carl had seen enemy combatants with more conscience. "Got him," Eddie murmured, every word on tape. But Carl wasn't satisfied yet. "We need Crystal on record, too. I want her admitting to the first bomb. I want her saying she wants me dead. No ambiguity, no room for a sympathy defense." "She's too smart for that," Eddie warned. "She won't talk over the phone about details." "No," Carl agreed. "But she'll talk to Loren in person, and we're going to be listening." Chapter 6, Confession. The next evening, Loren Reed called Crystal and asked her to meet him at their usual spot, a bar called the Crimson Room in a part of Denver where neither of them would run into people from their normal social circles. Carl and Eddie were already there, posing as patrons at the bar. Eddie had planted listening devices at multiple tables that afternoon, including the corner booth where Loren and Crystal always sat. Carl nursed a beer, his back to the booth, wearing a baseball cap and a jacket he'd never worn before. To anyone who glanced his way, he was just another tired guy unwinding after work. Crystal arrived first. Carl's heart rate didn't spike. He was too well trained for that. But seeing her, knowing what she'd done, what she'd planned, required every ounce of his control. She was wearing the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary last year. Her hair was styled the way she knew he liked it. She was still playing the grieving wife even here, in case anyone noticed her. Loren arrived 10 minutes later, and Carl could see the tension in the man's posture immediately. "We need to talk," Loren said, sliding into the booth. Through his earpiece, Carl heard every word with perfect clarity. "What's wrong?" Crystal asked. "You look terrible. Fernando Brooks knows about us. About Carl. About everything." Crystal's intake of breath was sharp. "How? Does it matter?" "He knows. He had his guy pick me up yesterday, lay out the whole thing." Lauren's voice was rising. "He wants 40% of the insurance money, or he goes to the police." 40%? That's the deal, Crystal. And honestly, it's better than what we had. His people will do the job. Professional. Clean. No mistakes like last time. Last time wasn't a mistake, Crystal hissed. Carl wasn't supposed to be in the garage. He was supposed to be in the house. And somehow that little brat Sophie heard something and got him out, Loren finished. "I know. You've told me a dozen times. The point is, we can't afford another failure. Fernando's guys know what they're doing." There was a long pause. Carl's hand tightened on his beer glass. Sophie. She called their daughter that little brat for saving their lives. "I don't want to give up 40%, Crystal said finally. "That's our money. Our future. It's this or nothing." "Fernando's not asking, Crystal. He's telling us." Another pause. "Then, fine. But I want it done right this time. Carl needs to die in a way that doesn't raise questions. I'm thinking a car accident. He drives that route to Eddie's house every day now." "A car accident can work," Loren agreed. "Make sure you're somewhere public when it happens. Hospital will be perfect. Lots of witnesses. I can arrange that." Crystal's voice had taken on a planning tone, clinical and detached. "What about Sophie?" Carl's entire body went rigid. "What about her?" Loren asked. "She's problematic. She heard me with the bomb. What if she tells someone else? Kids talk. She's 5 years old. No one's going to believe her over you. Still, it would be cleaner if—" "No." Lauren's voice was firm. "I'm not going to prison for killing a kid. That's where I draw the line." "You drew the line at $2 million, Crystal said coldly. "Don't pretend you have morals now." "Crystal, I'm serious. Killing Carl is one thing. He's an adult. He's the target. But Sophie? That's guaranteed death penalty if we're caught. Even Fernando's people won't touch a job like that." "Fine," Crystal said after a moment. "Fine. Carl's enough. Once he's dead, Sophie will go to my sister, and she'll be out of the picture anyway." Carl was shaking. Not from fear, but from rage, so pure and white-hot that it took everything in him not to turn around and confront her right there. She discussed killing their daughter the way someone might discuss putting down a dog. Eddie's hand landed on his shoulder, heavy and warning. Through his earpiece, Eddie's voice was subvocal. "Stay cool. We got them. Everything we need is on tape." Loren and Crystal continued planning for another 20 minutes. Timeline, logistics, how to act devastated when the police called about the accident. Carl recorded every word, every detail. When they finally left, Crystal kissing Loren goodbye with more passion than she'd shown Carl in months. Eddie and Carl remained at the bar for another 30 minutes to avoid suspicion. "That's it," Eddie said quietly. "We go to the police. We have confession, conspiracy, everything." But Carl was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" "You heard her. She wants you dead. She was willing to kill Sophie. Which is exactly why we can't just hand this to the police." Carl's voice was ice. "What happens then? She gets arrested, lawyers up, post bail. Maybe she's convicted, maybe she's not. Maybe she cuts a deal, testifies against Loren, gets a reduced sentence. Best case scenario, she's in prison for 15, 20 years. But she's alive. She's breathing. She gets to read books, watch TV, eventually get out on parole. Carl. She tried to murder my daughter, Eddie." Carl turned to face his friend. "Not just me. Sophie, a 5-year-old child who did nothing except exist. Eddie studied him for a long moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that the justice system isn't enough. I'm thinking that Crystal and Loren don't get to just survive this. Carl's smile was terrible. They wanted to play with explosives and stage accidents. So let's give them exactly what they wanted. You want to kill them. I want to give them the ending they wrote for me, Carl corrected. Poetic justice. And I want them to know, before they die, that I was the one who beat them. Eddie was quiet for a long moment. This crosses a line, brother. They crossed it first when they went after Sophie. You'll never come back from this. Carl thought of his daughter's terrified face. Her small voice saying Mommy put something in the garage. He thought of Crystal calling Sophie that little brat. He thought of the casual way she discussed murdering them both. I don't want to come back, Carl said. I want justice. Real justice. The kind that makes sure they never hurt anyone again. Eddie sighed. Then I'm in. Whatever you need. I need 2 things. First, I need Melvin to keep playing Victor, keep stringing Loren along. Make him think Fernando's people are setting up the car accident. Second, I need you to help me stage a scene. What kind of scene? Carl's smile was cold and precise. The kind where murderers get exactly what they deserve. Chapter 7. The Architect. Carl spent the next week being the perfect grieving homeowner. He spoke to insurance adjusters, met with contractors about rebuilding, and played the loving husband to Crystal's concerned wife, all while planning their destruction. The beauty of revenge, Carl had learned in the military, was in the details. Anyone could kill in anger, but to dismantle someone's life, to make them face justice in a way they couldn't escape or explain away, that required patience and precision. He reviewed the evidence dozens of times. The recordings, the surveillance footage, Crystal's confession about the bomb. It was enough to convict them both. But conviction meant lawyers, trials, appeals. It meant years of Sophie having to testify, having to relive her mother trying to kill her. No, this needed to end definitively. Carl called Melvin on day 8. How's our friend Loren? Anxious. He keeps asking when the accident is going to happen. I've been stalling, saying Fernando's people are being careful, waiting for the right moment. Tell him it's set for tomorrow night. I'll be driving home from Eddie's place around 10 p.m., taking the usual route. There's a section on Highway 36 with sharp curves and minimal traffic. Tell him that's where it'll happen. And what's actually happening tomorrow night? Justice. Carl's plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would stage his own death, or rather, stage enough evidence of his death that Crystal and Loren would believe it. They'd relax, thinking they'd won. And that's when he'd strike. Eddie had connections with a military buddy, George Hodges, who ran a special effects company. George specialized in realistic trauma effects for TV and film. Over the next 24 hours, they worked together to create a scene that would fool anyone who wasn't looking for a setup. You're sure about this? George asked as he worked on creating a perfect replica of Carl's driver's license and personal effects. Faking your death is serious business. Lots of legal ramifications. I won't be dead for long, Carl assured him. Just long enough. The night of the planned accident, Carl drove his truck to the designated spot on Highway 36. Eddie followed in a separate vehicle, along with George and his equipment. The section of road was perfect, sharp curve, steep embankment, heavy trees. The kind of place where a car could plausibly go off the road and catch fire. That's exactly what they staged. George used a combination of accelerants, controlled burns, and his movie magic to create a crash scene that looked devastatingly real. They set fire to Carl's truck at the base of the embankment, positioned the burned replica effects where a body would be, and scattered Carl's personal effects, wallet, phone, keys, in the wreckage. From a distance, in the dark, with the fire blazing, it looked exactly like Carl Wolf had lost control of his vehicle and crashed. Eddie made the 911 call from a burner phone, reporting the accident. Then they disappeared into the darkness. Carl watched from the tree lean as emergency responders arrived, watched as firefighters extinguished the blaze, watched as investigators examined the scene. He'd left just enough forensic evidence, blood samples he'd provided, dental impressions George had planted, to make initial identification plausible. It wouldn't hold up to serious investigation, but it didn't need to. He just needed Crystal and Loren to believe it for about 72 hours. That's all the time he needed. Chapter 8. The Collapse. The news of Carl Wolf's death spread fast. Detective Randall Daniel called Crystal personally to inform her. Carl listened to the recording of that call. Eddie had tapped her phone, so they heard everything. Mrs. Wolf? I'm very sorry, but there's been an accident. Your husband's truck went off Highway 36 earlier this evening. The vehicle caught fire. I'm afraid there were no survivors. Crystal's scream was Oscar-worthy. Her sobs sounded genuine. She played the devastated widow perfectly. The moment she hung up, she called Loren. It's done. Oh my God, it's done. Carl's dead. You're sure? Lauren's voice was cautious. The police called me. His truck went off the highway. They found his body in the wreckage. He's really gone, Loren. We're free. There was no grief in her voice now, just relief and triumph. Carl listened to this from Eddie's basement, where he was technically dead. Sophie was with Eddie's ex-wife, Angela Richards, a kind woman who'd been told that Carl was in protective custody while the police investigated threats against his family. It was close enough to the truth. Now we wait, Carl said, turning off the recording. For what? Eddie asked. For them to get comfortable, to think they've won. Carl pulled up a series of documents on Eddie's computer. And while they're celebrating, we're going to destroy them. Over the next 2 days, Carl, supposedly dead but very much alive, began systematically dismantling Crystal and Lauren's lives. He started with the insurance company. Using evidence he'd compiled, he submitted an anonymous tip to the Fraud Investigation Department, complete with recordings of Crystal and Loren discussing the murder plot. Insurance companies hated paying out fraudulent claims, and they had their own investigators who would dig deep. Next, he sent the same evidence to Detective Daniel, but from an untraceable email address. Regarding Carl Wolf's death, it was an accident. Attached evidence suggests his wife and her boyfriend planned his murder. Finally, and most satisfyingly, he contacted Fernando Brooks directly. This was the riskiest move. Fernando Brooks was a criminal, but he was also a businessman. He didn't like people using his name without permission, and he especially didn't like people like Loren Reed trying to involve him in murder schemes. Carl arranged a meeting through one of Eddie's contacts. They met at a restaurant downtown, just Carl and Fernando, a silver-haired man in his 60s who looked more like a banker than a loan shark. You're supposed to be dead, Fernando observed, sipping his scotch. Rumors of my death, etc. Carl laid out the situation, Lauren's debt, the insurance scheme, Melvin posing as Fernando's enforcer. Fernando listened, his expression growing darker. So Reed used my name to shake down his girlfriend for a murder plot. That's the situation. And you're here because I want him to understand he screwed with the wrong people. Both of them, Crystal and Loren. Carl met Fernando's eyes. I have evidence of everything. I could go to the police, but lawyers would muddy the waters. I'm offering you first crack at him. A man who owes you money, tried to use your name, and made you look like a fool. Fernando was quiet for a long moment. What's in it for you? I get to watch, Carl said simply. I get to see them realize they've lost. And then I go to the police with everything, and they spend the rest of their lives in prison for attempted murder. You want revenge. I want justice. They try to kill my 5-year-old daughter. Carl's voice was flat. You do whatever you want with Loren Reed. I won't shed a tear, but I want him terrified first. Fernando studied him, then nodded slowly. I can respect that. A man protects his family. He pulled out his phone. Give me an hour. True to his word, within an hour, Fernando's actual enforcers picked up Loren Reed from his apartment. They took him to the same warehouse where Melvin had posed as Victor, but this time, the meeting was very real. Carl watched via Eddie's surveillance equipment as 2 large men explained to Loren Reed that Fernando Brooks did not appreciate having his name used without permission, that there would be consequences. They didn't kill him. Fernando was too smart to commit murder when Carl had literally handed him a gift-wrapped alternative. But they made it clear that Lauren's debt had just tripled, and he had 1 week to pay or face traditional collection methods. Loren was a broken man when they released him. Terrified, realizing that everything was falling apart, he called Crystal immediately. We have a problem. The real Fernando Brooks knows about us. His guys just grabbed me. They know about Carl, about the insurance. Everything. What? How? I don't know. But we're screwed, Crystal. We're completely screwed. Carl smiled, listening to the panic in their voices. The trap was closing. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Carl Wolf rose from the dead on day 3. He walked into the Denver police station at exactly 10 a.m., causing a scene that would become legendary in the department. Detective Randall Daniel literally dropped his coffee when he saw Carl approaching his desk. "Mr. Wolf? But we found your body." "You found a staged crime scene," Carl interrupted. He set down a flash drive. "Everything you need is on here. Recordings of my wife and her boyfriend planning my murder. Surveillance footage. Financial records. Their full confession." Within an hour, the station was chaos. Captain Art Osborne assembled a task force. The DA was called in. Carl sat in an interview room and walked them through everything methodically, with the precision of the investigator he'd once been. "You staged your own death," Daniel said, sounding somewhere between impressed and furious. "That's obstruction of justice, filing a false report." "I filed no reports," Carl corrected. "Someone called in an accident. I wasn't there to confirm or deny anything. And I'm here now, alive, with evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder." The DA, a sharp-eyed woman named Isabel Wells, reviewed the recordings. Her expression grew colder with each minute. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "Mr. Wolf, you've done our job for us. But Detective Daniel is right. What you did was legally questionable. I did what I had to do to protect my daughter and gather evidence that would stick," Carl said flatly. "My wife tried to murder me and my 5-year-old. I'm not apologizing for making sure she can't hurt anyone else." Isabel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll deal with the technicalities later. Right now, let's bring them in." The arrest happened simultaneously. Crystal was at work this time, maintaining her grieving widow persona. Loren was at his apartment, probably packing to run. Neither of them expected the police. Carl watched Crystal's arrest via body cam footage later. The moment she saw the officers, the moment they said, "Crystal Wolf, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder," her face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, confusion, denial, and finally, when they mentioned Carl was alive, absolute terror. "That's impossible," she breathed. "He's dead." She caught herself, but too late. "We what, Mrs. Wolf?" the officer asked. Crystal lawyered up immediately, but it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial took 6 months to reach court, but when it did, it was brutal. The prosecution played the recordings of Crystal and Loren casually discussing Carl's murder, debating whether to kill Sophie, planning the insurance fraud. The jury's faces grew harder with each piece of evidence. Carl testified, walking through his investigation with calm precision. When Crystal's defense attorney tried to paint him as a vindictive ex-husband who'd fabricated everything, Carl simply pointed to the forensic evidence from the original explosion. "The bomb was real," he said. "The fire marshal confirmed it. My house was destroyed. My daughter heard her mother planting it. Everything else follows from that fact." Sophie didn't have to testify. Carl had made sure of that. The recordings were enough. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Crystal Wolf and Loren Reed were sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Colorado didn't have the death penalty anymore, but life in a maximum security prison was its own kind of death. Carl stood in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence, watching Crystal's face crumble. She looked at him across the room, and for just a moment, their eyes met. He saw the question there. "How did you do it? How did you beat us?" Carl didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply looked at her with the cold certainty of a man who'd hunted far more dangerous prey than a nurse and her boyfriend. Then he turned and walked out of the courtroom to where Eddie waited with Sophie. His daughter ran to him, and Carl scooped her up, holding her tight. She was in therapy now, working through the trauma of what her mother had done. It would take time, maybe years, but Sophie was strong. She'd survived. They both had. "Is it over?" Sophie asked quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart," Carl said, carrying her toward the exit. It's over. The bad guys lost. Because you're smarter than them? Carl smiled, pressing a kiss to his daughter's hair. Because I had something worth fighting for, and they didn't. Outside the courthouse, the Denver sun was bright and clear. Eddie clapped Carl on the shoulder, and they walked together toward Eddie's truck, Sophie chattering about her day at school, about her friends, about everything except the trial. Carl Wolf had been a soldier, an investigator, a husband, a father. Crystal had tried to reduce him to a victim, to a target, to a corpse. She'd forgotten that some men couldn't be broken because they'd been forged in harder fires than anything she could create. She'd planted a bomb in his garage and thought she'd destroyed him. Instead, she'd awakened something far more dangerous. A protector who wouldn't stop until his daughter was safe and justice was served. As they drove away from the courthouse, Carl looked back one last time at the building where Crystal would spend the rest of her life. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that his family was safe and the people who'd threatened them could never hurt anyone again. That was enough. That was justice. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Damon Lynch had built his fortune on reading people, knowing when they lied, when they schemed, when they betrayed. 20 years in private security consulting had taught him that everyone had secrets, but he never imagined the darkest secret would be sleeping beside him every night. The call from his assistant came at 2:47 a.m. during his business trip to Chicago. Mr. Lynch, your wife called. Your daughter, Emma, is at St. Mary's Hospital with an ear infection. Damon caught the first flight home to Denver, his mind racing. 6-year-old Emma had always been healthy, never even a serious cold. The 3-hour flight felt eternal as worry gnawed at him. Christine had sounded frantic on the phone, barely coherent through her tears. He burst through the hospital doors at 8 a.m., still wearing his rumpled business suit. Christine sat in the waiting room, her auburn hair disheveled, makeup smeared. Beside her sat her father, Herman Butler, a man Damon had never fully trusted despite 15 years of marriage. "Daddy," Emma's weak voice called as he entered her room. She lay pale against white sheets, her left ear bandaged. "Hey, princess, Daddy's here now." Damon kissed her forehead, his heart breaking at her fevered state. Dr. Patricia Trujillo entered, her expression grave. "Mr. Lynch, I need to speak with you privately." In the hallway, the doctor's words hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't a natural infection. Someone deliberately placed a foreign object deep in your daughter's ear canal. It caused significant inflammation and could have permanently damaged her hearing. Damon's blood turned to ice. "What kind of object?" Dr. Trujillo's hands trembled slightly as she produced a small evidence bag. Inside was a sophisticated microtransmitter no bigger than a pill. "It's some kind of listening device. Very advanced. The police have been notified, but Mr. Lynch." She paused, studying his face. "Did you leave your daughter with someone recently?" "Yes." The word came out as a growl. "With my wife and her parents during my business trip." The doctor's expression darkened. "Mr. Lynch, placing this required medical precision. Someone held your daughter down and inserted this deep enough to avoid detection during casual examination. This was calculated." Damon stared at the device, his mind processing implications with the cold efficiency that had made him successful. Someone had used his daughter as a surveillance device. Someone with access to his home, his family, his life. "Who knew about your Chicago meeting?" Dr. Trujillo asked gently. "My wife, her parents, my business partner." Damon stopped, a terrible realization forming. Only 4 people knew the specific details of that deal. As if summoned by his thoughts, Christine appeared in the doorway. "Damon, what's wrong? You look. Come here." His voice was deadly calm. Christine approached hesitantly, her green eyes darting between Damon and the doctor. When she saw the evidence bag, her face went white. "Can you explain this?" Damon held up the transmitter. What is that?" "I don't understand." But Damon saw it. The micro-expression that lasted a split second. Recognition. Fear. Not confusion. In that instant, 20 years of reading people told him everything he needed to know. The doctor says someone with medical knowledge placed this in Emma's ear. Damon's voice remained eerily controlled. "Someone who had access to her while I was in Chicago." Christine's lip trembled. "Are you suggesting? How could you even think?" "I'm not suggesting anything." Damon pocketed the evidence bag. "I'm stating facts. Someone used our daughter as a listening device. Someone who knew about the Chicago deal, which is worth $47 million. Dr. Trujillo cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to discuss this. Emma will be fine, but I recommend counseling for the trauma." She looked directly at Christine. Children remember violation, even when they can't articulate it. After the doctor left, husband and wife stood in the sterile hallway, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between them. "I would never hurt Emma," Christine whispered. "No," Damon agreed, his gray eyes boring into hers. "But you'd let someone else do it." Christine's composure cracked. "That's not." "You're wrong." "Am I?" Damon stepped closer, and Christine unconsciously retreated. "Then explain why my daughter has nightmares about the man with cold hands that started exactly 3 days ago. Explain why she's been afraid to sleep in her own room. Explain why she keeps asking if the doctor game is over." Each word hit Christine like a physical blow. Her face cycled through emotions, denial, fear, guilt, and finally a flash of something that looked almost like relief. "Damon, please." "No." He turned toward Emma's room. "I'm taking my daughter home. You can go back to your parents' house. Don't come home until I say you can." As Damon walked away, he heard Christine's whispered phone call. It didn't work. He knows something's wrong. "What do we do now?" Damon smiled coldly. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2. Unraveling Threads. Damon's Bentley pulled into the circular driveway of his Highlands Ranch mansion at sunset. Emma slept peacefully in her car's seat, finally free of pain thanks to antibiotics. The Victorian-style home he'd bought for Christine's 30th birthday now felt like a crime scene. "Ross, I need you here." Damon spoke in his phone as he carried Emma inside. Ross Hartman had been his business partner for a decade, and the closest thing Damon had to a friend. "Bring the debugging equipment." While waiting, Damon tucked Emma into the guest bedroom. He couldn't bear putting her back in her own room yet, and began his own investigation. Years of security work had taught him that amateurs always left traces. In Christine's walk-in closet, he found the first evidence, a cell phone hidden behind shoeboxes. Not a regular phone, but a burner with only 3 contacts: G, Dad, and Emergency. The text history made his blood boil. G, device placement successful. Audio quality excellent. Christine, she cried for hours. "I can't do this anymore." G, remember what's at stake. Chicago deal worth more than we estimated. Christine, what about after? You promised we'd be together. G, soon, baby. Once Lynch is eliminated, everything changes. Eliminated. They weren't just stealing from him. They were planning to kill him. Ross arrived within an hour, his tall frame carrying sophisticated electronic equipment. "Jesus, Damon, you look like death. What's this about?" Damon showed him the transmitter and the text messages. Ross, a former Navy SEAL turned tech specialist, whistled low. "Military grade. This isn't some cheating wife hiring a private investigator. Someone with serious resources is after you. Sweep the house. Everything." It took 3 hours, but they found 6 more devices, 2 in Damon's home office, 1 in the master bedroom, 1 in his car, and 2 in his personal study. The level of surveillance was extraordinary. "They know everything," Ross muttered, examining a device disguised as a wall outlet. "Every phone call, every meeting, every conversation with Emma." Damon's jaw clenched. "How long?" "Based on the installation methods, I'd say 6 months minimum." 6 months. His mind raced through every private conversation, every business deal, every intimate moment with his wife. All of it recorded, analyzed, used against him. There's more, Ross said grimly. These devices have been transmitting to a location in Cherry Creek. Expensive neighborhood. Damon knew Cherry Creek well. It's where he'd first met Gerard Hancock 5 years ago at a charity gala. Gerard, the charming art dealer who'd become a family friend. Gerard, who'd been to their house dozens of times. Gerard, who'd shown unusual interest in Damon's business dealings. I want full surveillance on Gerard Hancock, Damon told Ross. Financial records, phone logs, travel history. Everything. You think he's G? I think he's a dead man. As if to confirm his suspicions, Damon's phone buzzed with a text from Christine. Please come to Dad's house. We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Instead of responding, Damon drove to Cherry Creek and parked outside Gerard's gallery. Through the window, he could see Gerard pacing frantically, phone pressed to his ear. Even from 50 yards away, the man's body language screamed panic. Damon's phone rang. Unknown number. Lynch. His voice was ice. Mr. Lynch? A nervous voice he didn't recognize. This is Craig Durham. I work for Gerard Hancock. He asked me to call you. Put him on. He can't come to the phone right now, but he wanted me to tell you that there's been a misunderstanding about your wife. And Damon hung up and called Ross. I need backgrounds on every employee at Hancock Gallery. Also check Gerard Hancock's financial records against anyone named Craig Durham. 20 minutes later, Ross called back. Craig Durham is Gerard's accountant, but here's the interesting part. He's also Herman Butler's nephew. The pieces clicked into place. Herman Butler, Christine's father, and a retired banker with connections throughout Denver's financial district. Gerard Hancock, art dealer with cash flow problems and expensive tastes. Craig Durham, the link between them. This wasn't just about adultery. This was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving his wife's family, her lover, and possibly others. They'd used his daughter as a surveillance device to steal his business secrets and plan his murder. Damon smiled grimly as he watched Gerard through the gallery window. The man was sweating despite the cool evening air, constantly checking his watch and phone. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Christine. Damon, please. Emma needs both her parents. Can't we work this out? He typed back. Come home tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. We'll work everything out. As he drove home, Damon's mind was already 3 steps ahead. These people had made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated him. They thought he was just another wealthy businessman, soft, trusting, vulnerable. They were about to learn that Damon Lynch had earned his fortune in the shadows, where mercy was weakness and betrayal was paid for in blood. Chapter 3. The Banker's Gambit. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Damon sat in his home office reviewing financial records while Emma ate breakfast with a nanny he'd hired overnight, a thoroughly vetted former FBI agent named Rebecca Hall. He would never again leave his daughter's safety to chance. The previous night's research had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Herman Butler hadn't retired from banking. He'd been forced out after an internal investigation into unauthorized account access. Gerard Hancock's gallery was bleeding money, kept afloat by questionable loans. Craig Durham had been quietly moving money between offshore accounts for both men. But the real revelation came when Damon accessed his own bank records. Over the past 6 months, someone had been making small withdrawals from his accounts. Never enough to trigger alerts, but totaling nearly $300,000. The money had been filtered through a complex web of accounts before landing in a Cayman Islands bank. They've been bleeding me dry, he murmured, studying the transfer patterns. His phone rang. It was Spencer Gomez, his security company's forensic accountant. Damon, you need to see this. I ran the financial analysis you requested on the Butler family. Spencer's voice was tight with excitement. Herman Butler has been planning this for years. He's got detailed records going back to your wedding. What kind of records? Everything. Your business deals, personal habits, even psychological profiles. It's like he's been studying you as a mark since day one. The implications hit Damon like a physical blow. His marriage hadn't just gone bad. It had been a setup from the beginning. 15 years of his life, his daughter's birth, every intimate moment. All of it orchestrated. Spencer, I need you to do something for me. Can you trace the exact source of the listening device? These things have serial numbers, manufacturing records. Already on it. Give me an hour. Damon hung up and walked to the kitchen where Emma was playing with her cereal. Despite everything, she was smiling. The resilience of childhood was remarkable. Daddy, when is Mommy coming home? Tonight, sweetheart. But first, Daddy has some work to do. At 10 a.m., Ross arrived with a thick folder and a grim expression. You're not going to like this. The surveillance photos were devastating. Gerard and Christine had been meeting regularly for over a year, but not just for romantic encounters. The photos showed them with Herman Butler, Craig Durham, and two other men Damon didn't recognize at various locations around Denver. It gets worse, Ross continued. I tracked down the listening device's serial number. It was purchased by a company called Mountain Security Solutions. Never heard of them. That's because it's a shell company. Guess who's listed as the primary shareholder? Damon's jaw tightened. Herman Butler. Gets better. Mountain Security Solutions has contracts with 3 major Denver banks, including First National, where your business accounts are held. The final piece clicked. Herman Butler had used his banking connections to establish a security company, which gave him legitimate access to surveillance equipment and inside information about high-value targets. Damon wasn't their first victim. He was just their biggest score. There's one more thing, Ross said quietly. I found evidence of at least 4 other similar operations over the past decade. Wealthy men, all of them had wives or girlfriends connected to Herman Butler's extended network. What happened to them? Ross opened another folder, revealing newspaper clippings. 2 died in accidents. 1 supposedly committed suicide during a messy divorce. The 4th disappeared entirely, declared dead after 7 years. Damon stared at the photos of dead men who'd trusted the wrong people. Men like him, who'd built wealth and then had it stolen by those closest to them. They're not just thieves, he said quietly. They're serial killers. At 3 p.m., Spencer called back with more devastating news. Damon, the Chicago deal, they know every detail. I found evidence that Gerard Hancock has been in contact with your competitors. If that deal falls through, you're looking at bankruptcy. Can you save it? Maybe. But I need to know, how far are you willing to go? Damon looked out his window at Emma playing in the garden, protected by Rebecca, Hull's watchful presence. His daughter deserved better than a father who rolled over when threatened. Whatever it takes. That evening at 7:45 p.m., Damon sat in his living room, a glass of bourbon in hand. The house was quiet. Emma was at a sleepover with the daughter of one of his most trusted employees, safely away from what was about to unfold. At exactly 8 p.m., Christine's car pulled into the driveway. She entered the house cautiously, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. Where's Emma? She asked. Safe. Damon gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Christine perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly. Damon, about the device. I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, let me tell you what I know. Damon's voice was conversational, almost friendly. I know about Gerard. I know about your father's company. I know about the money you've been stealing. I know about the Chicago deal. Christine's face went white, but she tried to maintain her composure. You're jumping to conclusions. I know about Mountain Security Solutions. I know about the other victims. I know about the murders. The last word hung in the air like a death sentence. Christine's facade crumbled completely. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. When Dad first suggested it, he said we'd just take some money and disappear. Then Gerard got involved, and things got complicated. Complicated. Damon's voice turned deadly. You put a listening device in our daughter's ear. You violated a 6-year-old child to steal from me. Tears streamed down Christine's face. I never wanted to hurt Emma. I told them it was too much, but they said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill you anyway and make it look like a business rival did it. So you chose to betray me instead of warn me. I chose to keep you alive. Christine's composure snapped. Do you think this was easy? Living with the guilt, pretending everything was normal? Damon stood slowly, his gray eyes boring into hers. You want to know what's not easy? Explaining to my daughter why Mommy hurt her. Rebuilding a business after your family tried to destroy it. Learning that my entire marriage was a lie. What are you going to do? Damon smiled. And for the first time, Christine saw the man who'd built his fortune in the shadows of private security. I'm going to give you and your conspirators exactly what you deserve. Chapter 4. The Professional's Preparation. 3 days after Christine's confession, Damon sat in his private office reviewing personnel files. The room had been completely debugged and secured, making it the only place in his house where he could plan freely. His laptop displayed detailed dossiers on each member of the conspiracy, compiled by his team of investigators. Ross entered carrying coffee and a secure phone. The Chicago deal? Secured. Spencer managed to convince our partners that the leak came from their side. Damon closed the laptop. They're actually offering better terms now, out of guilt. And the targets? Damon opened a leather folder containing 5 photographs. Herman Butler, Gerard Hancock, Craig Durham, and 2 other men, Sean Archer and Byron Frazier, who'd been identified as muscle for the operation. Herman Butler is the architect. Take him down, the rest fall apart. Damon's finger traced Butler's photo. But I want them all to understand what happens when you touch my family. Ross studied the photos with professional interest. Both men had worked in private security long enough to know that some problems couldn't be solved through legal channels. What's the timeline? 3 weeks. I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves, then pull it tight all at once. Damon's phone buzzed with a text from Christine. Please let me see Emma. I'm staying at Dad's house and going crazy. Instead of responding, Damon called his lawyer, Clarence Kelly, a man who specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets. Clarence, I need a complete forensic audit of my wife's family. Financial records, property ownership, everything going back 15 years. Preparing for divorce proceedings? Preparing for war. That afternoon, Damon drove to an industrial warehouse in Commerce City where he kept specialized equipment from his security consulting days. Most of his clients had been legitimate corporations, but some assignments had required tools that existed in legal gray areas. The warehouse contained everything from surveillance equipment to more exotic items, the kind of hardware that could make problems disappear permanently. Damon had hoped never to access this arsenal again, but his family's safety demanded exceptions to his usual moral boundaries. He selected several items: untraceable communication devices, miniature cameras, financial tracking software, and other tools that would level the playing field against his enemies. His secure phone rang. It was Frederick Dodson, a contact from his military contracting days who now operated private intelligence services. Lynch? Heard you might need some specialized assistance. Maybe. Can you provide background on a man named Gerard Hancock? I need everything. Financial, personal, criminal history, if any. Give me 48 hours. That evening, Damon picked up Emma from Rebecca Hall's apartment. The nanny had been invaluable, providing security while also serving as a trauma counselor for Emma's recent experiences. How is she? Damon asked as Emma played with toys in the next room. Resilient. Children are remarkable that way. But she's been asking about her mother. I know. I'm trying to protect her from the worst of this. Rebecca studied Damon's face. And what happens when the protection requires actions that can't be undone? The question hung between them. Rebecca had been FBI long enough to recognize when someone was planning something that crossed legal lines. My daughter's safety comes first, Damon said finally. Everything else is secondary. That night, after Emma was asleep, Damon received a call from Spencer with disturbing news. They're accelerating their timeline. Gerard Hancock just booked a flight to the Cayman Islands for next week. If he reaches those offshore accounts, the money disappears forever. How much are we talking about? Based on my analysis, close to $2 million stolen from you and at least 3 other victims over the past 5 years. Damon felt his anger crystallize into cold determination. They weren't just thieves. They were predators who'd perfected their system over years of practice. Spencer, I need you to freeze every account you can identify. Use whatever legal mechanisms necessary. Already in progress. But Damon, once we make these moves, they'll know we're onto them. They might run, or worse, they might accelerate their plans for you. Good. Let them come. The next morning, Damon received the call he'd been expecting. Herman Butler's voice was carefully controlled, but Damon could hear the underlying tension. Damon, I think we need to talk. Man to man. About what, Herman? About Christine. About the family. About misunderstandings that have gotten out of hand. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me at my house tonight. 7 o'clock. Just you and me. Damon smiled grimly. They were finally ready to make their move. I'll be there. After hanging up, Damon called Ross. They're accelerating. Butler wants a face-to-face tonight. It's a trap. Of course it is. Which is why we're going to be ready for them. As Damon prepared for the evening's confrontation, he thought about the men who'd underestimated him. They saw a successful businessman and assumed that meant soft, naive, unprepared for real violence. They were about to learn that Damon Lynch had earned his fortune in darker corners of the world, where survival depended on being more ruthless than your enemies. Tonight, the hunt would begin in earnest. Chapter 5, Setting the Trap. Herman Butler's house in Cherry Hills Village looked like something from a magazine, sprawling ranch style with manicured gardens and a circular driveway lined with expensive cars. As Damon pulled up at 7 p.m., he noted the positioning. Gerard Hancock's BMW, Craig Durham's Mercedes, and a black SUV he didn't recognize. They'd brought backup. Good. He planned for that. Ross's voice crackled through Damon's nearly invisible earpiece. I've got eyes on all exits. 3 men inside besides Butler, Gerard, Durham, and someone new. Big guy looks military. That'll be Sean Archer. Former mercenary, works private security now. Damon checked his concealed recording device one final time. Remember, I need them to confess on record before we move to Phase 2. Damon walked to the front door, his movements relaxed and confident. He'd learned long ago that appearing unthreatened often made opponents overconfident. Herman Butler answered the door personally, his politician's smile firmly in place. At 62, he still carried himself with the authority of a man who'd controlled millions in banking assets. Damon, come in, come in. Thank you for agreeing to meet. The living room had been carefully arranged. Herman sat behind a large oak desk, a power position. Gerard Hancock lounged in a leather chair to the left, trying to look casual but failing to hide his nervousness. Craig Durham sat rigid in a straight-back chair, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool evening. The fourth man stood near the window, Sean Archer, exactly as Ross had described. 6'3", military-bearing, the kind of man who solved problems with violence. Drink, Herman offered, gesturing to a well-stocked bar. I'm fine. Damon took the chair opposite Herman, noting the positioning put Archer behind him. Amateur hour. What did you want to discuss? Herman's expression grew serious. My daughter made some serious accusations about listening devices, financial irregularities, frankly, some pretty wild conspiracy theories. Are they theories? Of course they are. Gerard finally spoke, his voice too loud. This whole thing is a misunderstanding that's gotten completely out of hand. Damon turned to study Gerard. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, the kind of man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Explain the misunderstanding. Gerard exchanged glances with Herman. The device your daughter, the one found in her ear, it was placed there by accident. Accident. Damon's voice was dangerously quiet. Medical confusion, Craig Durham interjected, speaking for the first time. A mix-up at the hospital during a routine examination. Damon almost laughed. They were really going to try to gaslight him. So you're saying Dr. Patricia Trujillo, a board-certified pediatric specialist, somehow confused a sophisticated listening device for standard medical equipment. The men exchanged nervous looks. Herman leaned forward, his banker's instincts telling him to cut losses. Damon, let's speak plainly. You're a successful man. Sometimes success makes enemies. It's possible someone planted that device to cause problems in your family. Someone with medical knowledge and access to my daughter. Exactly, which rules out anyone in this room. Damon pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Christine's confession from 3 nights ago. Her voice filled the room. When Dad first suggested it, he said we'd just take some money and disappear. Then Gerard got involved, and things got complicated. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sean Archer's hand moved closer to his jacket. She was emotional, Herman said carefully. Confused. You can't take anything she said seriously. She also mentioned other victims. For men over the past decade, 2 died in accidents. Now Gerard stood up, his composure finally cracking. You're fishing. You don't have any real evidence. Don't I? Damon's smile was predatory. Mountain Security Solutions. Shell Company established 3 years ago with Herman Butler as primary shareholder. Serial number VK 4471. X on the listening device. Purchased by Mountain Security 2 months ago. Craig Durham's face went pale. How could you possibly know? Because I'm better at this than you are. Herman Butler stood slowly, his politician's mask slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. You're right, of course. But it doesn't matter. Why not? Because you're not leaving this house alive. Sean Archer stepped forward, his hand inside his jacket. But instead of drawing a weapon, he produced a small device and pressed a button. The lights in the room dimmed, and Damon heard a subtle electronic hum. Signal jammer, Archer explained. Your friends outside just lost communication. Damon's expression didn't change. Did they? Through the window, 3 vehicles suddenly surrounded the house. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with military precision. Herman Butler's confidence evaporated. What the hell? You made one critical mistake, Damon said conversationally as the sounds of forced entry echoed from other parts of the house. You assumed I was some soft businessman who'd walk into your trap unprepared. Ross's voice came through Damon's earpiece, clear despite the jammer. Military-grade equipment has its advantages. All targets secured. The living room door burst open as Ross entered with 2 other men, Frederick Dodson and another operator Damon recognized from his military contracting days. Gerard tried to run, but Frederick tackled him before he reached the hallway. Craig Durham simply sat frozen, apparently too terrified to move. Gentlemen, Damon stood, brushing off his jacket. You wanted to have a conversation about my family. Now we're going to have that conversation properly. Herman Butler's face was ashen. You can't do this. We have rights. You gave up your rights when you tortured my daughter. Damon's voice turned deadly cold. When you stole from me. When you planned to murder me. Sean Archer reached for his weapon, but found himself staring down the barrels of 3 assault rifles. He slowly raised his hands. Smart man, Frederick commented. Damon walked to Herman's desk and sat down, appropriating the power position. Now, let's discuss exactly how this is going to work. You're going to return every penny you've stolen, from me and from your other victims. You're going to provide complete records of your operations. And then, he paused, studying each terrified face. Then we're going to discuss what happens to people who hurt children. Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm. The abandoned warehouse in Commerce City had been Damon's backup facility for years, a place where sensitive conversations could happen without interruption. Now it served as an interrogation center for the 5 men who destroyed his family. Each conspirator was secured in a separate room, unable to communicate with the others. Psychological isolation was always more effective than physical threats, though Damon wasn't ruling out the latter. Ross emerged from Herman Butler's room, carrying a laptop and several file folders. He's talking. Full confession, financial records, everything. Says he wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Immunity in exchange for information about their network. Turns out this operation is bigger than we thought. Damon studied the files Ross had brought. Bank records showed a complex web of theft spanning 7 years and involving 12 victims. All wealthy men who'd been systematically targeted, robbed, and in 4 cases murdered. How much total? Conservative estimate? $15 million. But that's just the liquid assets. They've also been acquiring property through shell companies, using stolen identities to establish credit lines, even running insurance fraud schemes. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just a family of thieves. It was an organized criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years. What about the others? Gerard is trying to blame everything on Herman. Says he was just following orders, didn't know about the murders. Ross's expression was disgusted. Craig Durham is claiming he was just doing bookkeeping, completely innocent. An Archer, professional to the end, won't say a word without his lawyer. Damon walked to the window, overlooking the warehouse floor. In the past 18 hours, his life had changed completely. He'd discovered his marriage was a fraud, his wife was a criminal, and his daughter had been tortured as part of an elaborate theft scheme. The old Damon might have turned everything over to the FBI and trusted the justice system. But the old Damon hadn't seen his daughter violated by the people he'd trusted most. His secure phone rang. It was Clarence Kelly, his attorney. Damon, I've completed the forensic audit you requested. You need to see this immediately. Bad news. Catastrophic news. Your wife has been systematically transferring marital assets for over 2 years. The house, your investment accounts, even Emma's college fund. It's all been leveraged as collateral for loans that went directly to offshore accounts. Damon closed his eyes. How much? Total exposure? You're looking at bankruptcy unless we can recover the assets quickly. And Damon, there's something else. Christine filed for divorce yesterday. She's claiming you threatened her and abandoned Emma. She's asking for full custody and spousal support. The final insult. They'd stolen his money, tortured his daughter, and now they want to take her away permanently. She's also filed a restraining order, Clarence continued. Claims you're dangerous and unstable. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Damon ended the call and stood silent for several minutes, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just planned to rob him. They designed a systematic destruction of his entire life. Ross appeared beside him. Problem? They're trying to take Emma. Ross's expression darkened. He'd seen Damon's relationship with his daughter, knew that Emma was the only thing that mattered to him. What do you need? Time. And evidence that will destroy them in court. How much time? 6 hours. The custody hearing is at 9 a.m. Ross nodded grimly. We'll get what you need. Over the next 3 hours, Damon's team extracted confessions from each conspirator. The methods weren't gentle, but they were effective. Herman Butler broke first, providing detailed records of the entire operation. Gerard Hancock followed, desperate to minimize his own culpability. Craig Durham, faced with evidence of his central role in the financial fraud, agreed to cooperate fully. Only Sean Archer remained silent, but his participation was documented by the others' testimony. By midnight, Damon had everything he needed: recorded confessions, financial records, documentation of 12 separate criminal schemes, and evidence that would not only clear his name, but destroy his enemies in court. But legal victory wasn't enough. These people had hurt his daughter. At 3 a.m., Damon sat alone with Herman Butler in the warehouse's main office. Butler looked haggard, his earlier confidence replaced by desperate fear. I've given you everything, Butler pleaded. Confessions, records, account numbers. I've cooperated completely. Yes, you have, Damon agreed. Which brings us to the final matter. What final matter? Damon leaned forward. You torture my daughter. You held down a 6-year-old child and violated her ear canal with a medical instrument. Butler's face went white. That wasn't my idea. Gerard insisted we needed audio surveillance. You were the one with medical connections. You were the one who arranged for the device placement. I thought it would just be uncomfortable. I didn't know it would cause an infection. Damon studied the man who'd orchestrated his family's destruction. Do you have children, Herman? 2 daughters. You know that. How would you feel if someone did to them what you did to Emma? Butler began to cry. Please, I'll do anything to make this right. I'll return every penny, testify against the others, whatever you want. I know you will, but that's not enough. Damon stood and walked to a steel cabinet, withdrawing a small medical kit. You see, Herman, I believe in proportional justice. You used medical knowledge to hurt my daughter, so we're going to use medical knowledge to hurt you. What are you talking about? Nothing permanent, nothing that will kill you. But you're going to experience exactly what Emma experienced, only without anesthesia. The next 2 hours broke Herman Butler completely. By dawn, he was a sobbing wreck who would have confessed to anything to make the pain stop. At 7 a.m., Damon walked out of the warehouse, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy his enemies in court. Behind him 5 broken men waited for the FBI agents who would arrive in exactly 1 hour, tipped off by an anonymous call about a major financial fraud operation. Emma would be safe. His business would recover. His enemies would spend decades in federal prison. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that each of them now understood what it felt like to be completely powerless, completely violated, completely at the mercy of someone who didn't care about their pain. Justice, Damon reflected, had many faces. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The Douglas County Courthouse was unusually crowded for a 9 a.m. custody hearing. Damon arrived with Clarence Kelly and a briefcase containing evidence that would change everything. Across the courtroom, Christine sat with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Jennifer Vance who specialized in high-asset divorces. Christine looked haggard, her usual polished appearance replaced by nervous energy. She'd clearly been crying, her makeup imperfect despite obvious attempts to repair it. Judge Patricia Monroe entered, a stern woman in her 50s known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. This is an emergency custody hearing in the matter of Lynch versus Lynch. Ms. Vance, you've alleged immediate danger to the minor child. Present your case. Jennifer Vance stood confidently. Your Honor, my client has evidence that her husband has become increasingly unstable and dangerous. Yesterday, he threatened her family and disappeared with their daughter for over 12 hours without explanation. Mr. Kelly? Clarence Kelly rose slowly, his expression grave. Your Honor, my client has been investigating a criminal conspiracy involving his wife and her family. What we've discovered will shock this court. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. Indeed it is. Clarence opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents. I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Lynch and her co-conspirators have been conducting an elaborate fraud scheme targeting wealthy men for robbery and murder. Jennifer Vance shot to her feet. Objection. This is a custody hearing, not a criminal trial. Sustained, but I'll allow limited presentation if it directly relates to the child's welfare. Clarence activated a laptop connected to the courtroom's display system. Your Honor, 3 days ago, the minor child Emma Lynch was taken to the hospital with a severe ear infection. What the doctors discovered was not a natural infection, but the result of someone deliberately placing a listening device deep in her ear canal. Christine's face went white as medical photographs appeared on the screen, showing the extracted transmitter. The device required medical knowledge to place correctly and was sophisticated enough to transmit audio for weeks without detection. Investigation revealed it was part of a comprehensive surveillance operation against Mr. Lynch, orchestrated by his wife and her father. Judge Monroe leaned forward, studying the evidence. These are serious allegations. Do you have proof of Mrs. Lynch's involvement? Yes, Your Honor. Clarence played the audio recording of Christine's confession. Her voice filled the courtroom. When Dad first suggested it, he said we'd just take some money and disappear. The recording continued for 10 minutes, documenting the entire conspiracy. By the end, Christine was sobbing quietly while her attorney sat in stunned silence. There's more, Clarence continued. Financial records show systematic theft of marital assets totaling over $2 million. Phone records document Mrs. Lynch's affair with Gerard Hancock, who has been identified as the operations field coordinator. Judge Monroe's expression grew increasingly severe. Mrs. Lynch, did you participate in placing this device in your daughter's ear? Christine could barely speak. I didn't want to. They said if I didn't help, they'd kill Damon anyway. So you chose to facilitate the torture of a 6-year-old child rather than contact authorities? I was scared. Of whom? My father, Gerard. They said they killed other people who didn't cooperate. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Monroe banged her gavel for silence. Mr. Kelly, where are these co-conspirators now? In federal custody, Your Honor. They were arrested this morning on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Jennifer Vance finally found her voice. Your Honor, even if these allegations are true, my client was clearly a victim of coercion. A victim who chose to torture her own daughter rather than protect her. Judge Monroe interrupted. Mrs. Lynch, you understand that I must immediately order a psychological evaluation? Yes, Your Honor. And that pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, you will have no contact with the minor child? Christine broke down completely. Please, she's all I have left. You should have considered that before you violated her trust and safety. Judge Monroe turned to Damon. Mr. Lynch, I'm granting you temporary sole custody of Emma Lynch. Mrs. Lynch will have supervised visitation only after completing court-ordered psychological evaluation and cooperating fully with federal authorities. As the judge's gavel fell, Christine collapsed in her chair, her world destroyed as completely as she'd tried to destroy Damon's. Outside the courthouse, Damon found Emma waiting with Rebecca Hall in his car. She ran to him with the uncomplicated joy of childhood, unaware that her world had just been permanently altered. Daddy, did you win? Yes, Princess. I won. Does that mean Mommy can't hurt my ear anymore? The question hit Damon like a physical blow. In her 6-year-old way, Emma had understood exactly what had happened to her. No one will ever hurt you again, he promised, holding her tightly. Daddy will make sure of that. That afternoon, Damon received a call from FBI agent Randy Stewart, who was heading the federal investigation. Mr. Lynch, I need to thank you. The evidence you provided has broken open a case we've been working for 3 years. We've now linked your wife's family to at least 15 separate criminal enterprises. What happens next? Full prosecution. Based on the confessions and financial evidence, we're looking at life sentences for Herman Butler and Gerard Hancock. Your wife? That depends on how much she cooperates. Damon felt a cold satisfaction. And the other victims? We're working to recover assets and provide restitution. Your actions may have saved several other families from destruction. As Damon hung up, he reflected on the strange justice of the situation. In trying to destroy him, his enemies had exposed themselves completely. Their greed and arrogance had been their downfall. Emma would grow up without her mother, but she'd also grow up without the threat of people who viewed her as nothing more than a tool for theft and manipulation. That evening, as Damon tucked Emma into bed in her own room, finally safe again, she asked the question he'd been dreading. Daddy, why did Mommy hurt me? Damon chose his words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices. It doesn't mean she didn't love you, but it means she chose something else over keeping you safe. Like choosing money over me. The insight was startling in a 6-year-old. Something like that. Will I see her again? Maybe someday, when you're older and if you want to. But for now, it's just you and me. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. That's okay. You're the best daddy in the world. As Damon watched his daughter fall asleep, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. The hunt was over. His enemies were destroyed. His family, what remained of it, was safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, justice had been served. Chapter 8. Consequences Unfold. 6 months later, Damon sat in his rebuilt home office, reviewing quarterly reports while Emma played nearby. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. Or perhaps because of it. The doorbell rang, and Rebecca Hall, now Emma's full-time nanny and Damon's head of security, answered it. She returned moments later with an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside was a handwritten letter from Christine, postmarked from the Federal Detention Center in Florence, Colorado. Damon, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this. I've been in counseling for 4 months now, trying to understand how I became the person who could hurt our daughter. The truth is, I've been planning this since before we got married. Dad recruited me specifically to target you. I was supposed to marry you, learn your business, and then disappear with a substantial settlement after a few years. But then Emma was born, and everything changed. I fell in love with her and with the life we'd built. I kept putting off the plan, making excuses to Dad and Gerard. They finally gave me an ultimatum. Cooperate completely or watch them kill you and frame me for it. I thought I was protecting you by helping them. I see now how wrong I was. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that Emma is the only thing I ever did right, and you're the only man I ever actually loved. Please tell her, when she's older, tell her I'm sorry. Christine. Damon folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. Perhaps someday Emma would want to read it, when she was old enough to understand the complexity of human nature. His phone rang. It was Spencer Gomez with the quarterly financial report. Good news across the board. The Chicago deal generated even more revenue than projected. Asset recovery from the Butler operation is nearly complete, and the new security consulting contracts are exceeding expectations. What about the civil suits? Settled. The victims' families are receiving full restitution plus punitive damages. Several have already expressed interest in hiring our security services. It was ironic. Being targeted by criminals had actually improved Damon's business reputation. Potential clients viewed him as someone who could handle serious threats and protect what mattered most. Ross entered the office carrying Emma's backpack and school artwork. How was school today, princess? Great. I got an A on my science project about sound waves. Emma beamed as she showed Damon her graded report. The innocent joy in her face still amazed him. Children's resilience was remarkable. With proper counseling and a secure environment, Emma had processed her trauma and moved forward with life. Mr. Lynch, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Agent Stewart is here to see you. FBI agent Randy Stewart had become a regular visitor over the past months, coordinating the complex investigation and prosecution. His presence usually meant developments in the case. Good news or bad news? Damon asked as Stewart entered. Mixed. Herman Butler died in federal custody yesterday. Heart attack. Damon felt no emotion at the news. Natural causes? The autopsy will determine that. But he'd been receiving threats from other inmates who didn't appreciate child abusers. And the others? Gerard Hancock pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. Life without parole. Craig Durham is cooperating fully. He'll serve 15 to 20. Sean Archer got 25 to life. What about Christine? Stewart's expression grew uncomfortable. That's the complicated part. Her cooperation has been invaluable, and her attorney is pushing for a reduced sentence based on duress and coercion. How reduced? 10 to 15 years, with possibility of parole in 7. Damon considered this. 7 years would make Emma 13 when her mother was released, old enough to decide for herself whether she wanted contact. There's something else, Stewart continued. We've identified 3 more criminal networks using similar methods. Your case broke open an entire ecosystem of organized family fraud. The Justice Department wants to offer you a consulting contract. What kind of consulting? Helping other victims, developing countermeasures, training investigators. The pay is substantial, and it would allow you to prevent what happened to Emma from happening to other children. The offer was tempting. Damon had always found satisfaction in protecting people, and this would give him a platform to do it systematically. I'll consider it. After Stewart left, Damon found Emma in her playroom, working on a puzzle. She looked up as he entered, her face bright with innocent happiness. Daddy, are you sad about something? Why do you ask? You have your thinking face on, the one you get when you're solving problems. Damon sat beside her on the floor. I was offered a new job. It would help other families who had bad things happen to them, like what happened to us. Similar things. Emma considered this seriously. Would it help other kids like me? Yes. Then you should do it. Kids shouldn't be hurt by grown-ups. The simple moral clarity of a 6-year-old put the decision in perspective. Damon had the resources, skills, and motivation to prevent other families from experiencing what they'd endured. You're right. I should do it. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Damon stood in his study looking at a wall of photographs. Images of the victims Herman Butler's network had targeted over the years. 15 families destroyed, from men murdered, dozens of children traumatized. His own experience had been terrible, but it had also given him the tools to ensure justice was served. Not just legal justice, but the kind of comprehensive consequences that would deter future predators. He thought about Christine, alone in her cell, finally understanding the full cost of her choices. About Gerard Hancock, facing decades in maximum security. About Herman Butler, whose heart had finally given out under the weight of his crimes. They'd thought they were hunting him, but in the end, he'd been the predator. The skills that had made him successful in private security Patience, planning, ruthless execution had served him well in personal warfare. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Lynch, my name is Sarah Chun. My husband was murdered by people who sound like the ones who targeted you. Agent Stewart gave me your number. Can you help?" Damon smiled grimly as he typed his response. "I'll be in touch tomorrow. We'll make sure they pay for what they did." The hunt never really ended. It just found new prey. Chapter 9. The New Order. 1 year after the hospital discovery that changed everything, Damon stood before a Senate subcommittee in Washington, D.C., presenting his report on organized family fraud networks. The past 12 months had transformed him from victim to advocate, and his consulting work with the FBI had helped dismantle criminal operations in 7 states. Senator Joan Randolph, the subcommittee chair, reviewed his findings with obvious concern. "Mr. Lynch, your testimony suggests these networks are far more sophisticated than previously understood." "Yes, Senator. They operate like intelligence agencies, recruiting assets, establishing long-term deep cover, conducting systematic surveillance. The network that targeted my family had been operational for over a decade and had generated an estimated $40 million in stolen assets. And the human cost?" Damon's expression hardened. 17 confirmed deaths. 32 children psychologically traumatized. Hundreds of families financially destroyed. These aren't opportunistic criminals. They're predators who've industrialized betrayal. After the hearing, Damon flew back to Denver, where Emma waited with Rebecca Hall at their new home in Greenwood Village. The old house held too many painful memories. This one was a fresh start, equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. "How was Washington?" Emma asked as they sat down for dinner. At 7, she was developing into a remarkably perceptive child, perhaps aged by her experiences but not broken by them. "Productive. We convinced some important people to take these crimes seriously." "Does that mean other kids won't get hurt?" "Fewer kids will get hurt. We can't prevent all bad things, but we can make them harder to do." Emma nodded solemnly. "Good. Nobody should have their ear hurt like mine was." Later that evening, Damon received a video call from Agent Stewart. "Got some news on the Christine situation. Good or bad? Depends on your perspective. She's agreed to testify against 3 more networks we've identified. Full cooperation in exchange for a transfer to minimum security. Timeline for release. Still 7 years minimum." "But Damon, there's something else." She's been writing to Emma. Damon's jaw tightened. "I told the prison. The letters aren't being delivered. They're being held per your instructions. But she's written over 50 letters in the past 6 months. Her counselor says it's part of her therapy process." "What do they say?" "Apologies mostly. Stories about Emma as a baby. Expressions of regret. Nothing manipulative or inappropriate." Damon considered this development. Part of him wanted to ensure Christine never had contact with Emma again. But another part recognized that Emma might someday want to understand her mother's perspective. Keep holding them. When Emma's older, if she asks, I'll consider sharing them selectively. Fair enough. Oh, and Damon, the consulting contract we discussed? State Department is interested in expanding it internationally. Seems these family fraud networks are operating in Europe and Asia too. The scope continued to expand. What had started as personal revenge was becoming a crusade against an entire criminal ecosystem. That night, as Damon tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question that had become routine. "Tell me about Mommy when she was good." It was a ritual they developed with Emma's therapist, balancing the reality of Christine's crimes with acknowledgement that she had once been capable of love. "Before you were born, Mommy and I went to Paris for our anniversary. She spent hours in the Louvre, looking at paintings. She said art helped her understand beauty in the world. Was she really bad then? Or did she become bad later?" The question was becoming more sophisticated as Emma grew older. "I think she was always capable of bad choices, but being your mommy brought out the good in her. That's why you're so special. You help someone be better than they naturally were. But not better enough to keep me safe." "No, not better enough for that." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you kept me safe, Daddy. I always will, Princess. That's my job." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Damon reflected on the transformation his life had undergone. A year ago, he'd been a successful businessman with a seemingly perfect family. Now he was a widower by choice, a single father by necessity, and a crusader by calling. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Frederick Dodson. New network identified in Miami. 3 families targeted. Request immediate consultation. Damon smiled grimly as he typed his response. En route tomorrow. Forward all intelligence. The hunt continued. It would always continue. But now he wasn't just protecting his own family. He was protecting families he'd never met, children he'd never see, people who would never know how close they'd come to destruction. In destroying his enemies, Damon had discovered his true purpose. He was no longer just a businessman who'd been betrayed. He was a guardian who understood that some people were predators, and predators only understood one language: overwhelming force applied without mercy or hesitation. His daughter was safe. His fortune was restored. His enemies were dead or imprisoned. But most importantly, he learned the truth about himself. Damon Lynch was not a man who forgave. He was not a man who forgot. He was a man who ensured that betrayal carried consequences so severe that others would think twice before targeting the innocent. The war against those who preyed on families would never end. But for the first time in his life, Damon Lynch was exactly